I'll say it's a really great pleasure for me to moderate this panel. I've been working with the new fuels space, the decarbonisation space for a little while, and this really is something of a rock star panel in terms of who we've got to join us here today. And I think this is a really interesting kind of area because it's one of those things that's kind of, it's about tomorrow, but it's coming at us much faster than we think. And the importance of getting things in place for it is becoming much, much more important. We see ships coming onto the water and everything. So are we ready? They're ready. I'm ready. If you could just come up to the stage, please, and I'll join this fantastic panel. Please welcome them to the stage, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to start by, as we didn't do the quick reading out of the names, I'm going to just start by asking everybody to just give us a quick introduction. So we'll run across just a brief introduction of who you are and who you're representing here today. Thanks. Please start us off.
I can start. Hello, I'm Kirsten, Stremsnes, from DNV, and hello everybody, nice to be here, so thank you for that. My background is from the maritime technology side, but also from the organizational psychology side. So I'm working a lot with organizational culture, safety culture, but been working with safety aspects for some decades now in DNV, from the technical side and towards the human factors side. So my experience is also from different sectors like energy and naval, and of course the maritime industry. So what I'm doing right now, I am head of a global program in DNV, focusing on safe operation related to new fuels, alternative fuels, and new technologies.
Thanks very much. Michael?
I'm Michael North. I'm Lloyd's Register's Senior Representative in Norway and Strategic Business Partner. I have a background as an electrical engineer and spent my first 5 years sailing around the world on a cruise ship, so have quite a good practical experience from sailing, as well as then working with various technical companies, including Rolls-Royce Marine, with whom I moved to Norway 15 years ago. And after that, I have also worked with both Wartsila and MAN, so I have quite a strong equipment background as well as sailing.
Thank you, Michael. Johan?
Yes, my name is Johan Ekval. I'm from Wartsila. I'm head of product for the simulation products that we offer for the deck and engineering officer training, making sure that our products are fit for market. Based in Gothenburg, have a background in the Navy, but started with simulation about 20 years ago.
Thank you, Johan. Simon?
Unmute.
Yes, hello everybody. Simon Grainge from ISWAN, International Seafarer Welfare Organisation, probably best known for our helplines that we provide support to seafarers and their families around the world. My background, the last 3 years I've been doing this job. Prior to that, 20 years working in NGOs around the world, and 20 years before that I was a police officer, so very human-centred career that I have.
Thank you. And last but by no means least, James.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's James Helliwell. I'm the Decarbonisation Manager for V.Group. We're a global ship management organisation. My background has been in research and development for Shell, looking at new fuels and energy-efficient technology for shipping. And I joined V.Group 6 months ago to help the organisation with all the new regulation that's coming in, so EU ETS, Fuel EU, and everything else. And I'm also the Vice Chair of the UK Chamber of Shipping Working Group for Alternative Fuels as well. Thank you.
So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. You will not find a finer panel in all the land. Thank you, thank you. And all of them are actively working right now on this stuff. So I'm very curious to know, aside from the room, of what else might be going on. So we'll get into the conversation. But if we could run the poll up there, and this is entirely anonymous, but just interested to know how you guys are actually approaching this, whether you're preparing and everything. So let's get stuck in anyway. Michael, I'd like you to set the scene for us. Lloyd's have obviously made a big focus of decarbonisation with setting up the Decarbonisation Hub, supporting the Just Transition Task Force as well, as indeed has DNV been doing as well. So could you just give us a sort of a bit of an overview of the very different aspects of decarbonisation that we sort of should be discussing today?
I think there's the actual technical feasibility of making things happen so that we get our ships both as efficient as possible and zero emissions as possible. So I think there's for the engineers who are now busily trying to work out how to make ammonia work, or may have already made it work, or hydrogen, or methanol, or sails. There's a lot of work going on just with the technology. Then you see us, how are we going to prove that technology, check that it's safe when we're thinking about inspections and things like that, and what we were talking about in the previous panel. And within all of that, there is also a different risk profile. So I remember I was an electrotechnical officer cadet, so of course I had to do some bridge time, had to do some engine room time. Part of my engine room time was sat in a bunker station smelling sulfur in Aruba. So that was simple connecting up pipes. Already we're seeing ships daily, the cargo ships daily bunkering LNG. We're going to be seeing ships within Norway and other countries quite soon, and already bunkering hydrogen. We have a very different profile also for the crew on how they're going to handle these challenges, as well as how us as class inspect and make sure it's safe, and how maintenance is done in service as well.
Great, so lots of different dimensions there. Kirsten, I'll come to you now, because DNV, when we first started with the Just Transition Task Force, DNV did some great work there, so right at the front with this, also, as I said, contributing with Just Transition Task Force. And there were very big numbers in that sort of first thing about the scale and the amount of training and stuff needed. But how are you looking at that from the point of view of the people that need preparing for this transition?
Yeah, it was 2 reports back in 2022 that we were writing, yeah, you're right. It was a big number of seafarers need for training. So, and that I think the main conclusion from that time still remains. However, I think that introducing new technologies, introducing alternative fuels, that comes, of course, with some safety concerns that needs to be trained on. But in order to ensure safe operation, I think it's 3 very important topics we need to consider at the same time. And that is, of course, it's the human element of the crew, the personnel, working in an organization dealing with a new technology. So I think it's very important that we have a holistic view on all these 3 parts. Change in one of the 3 will impact the others. So just to give you some examples of that, you already talked about the technology. We are working a lot on the technology to include safety measures in the technology to avoid accidents and incidents. And also, hopefully, human factor in design that will prevent the people from operate the system wrongly. So that is important and core and very vital as a basis. Then the crew or the personnel in general, they need, of course, competence. Of course, they need competence in, inspection and maintenance and how to operate the new systems. And also bunkering and, of course, new emergency situations they need to handle. Yeah. But I would like to emphasize as well competence within a more proactive safety approach in the way you're actually working. And what do I mean about that? I mean that the personnel on board needs to be more aware or have the competence on proactively identify small deviations and failures before they develop into something more dangerous and serious and able to correct them. Because you don't want a leak of hydrogen, of ammonia. Yeah. So you really need to avoid that as early as possible. And also doing small risk assessment in the way you're actually working. And that brings me to the third one, the organization. It will have impact on your organization. The safety management system will be different. You will have different procedures. You will have maybe different stakeholders to relate to, maybe different roles. But the most important task for the organization when they are choosing alternative fuels is that they need to accommodate for a proactive safety culture. You mentioned that earlier as well. But that is so core. It's, of course, the individual that needs to work in a safe way, but it is the organization that needs to accommodate for this. So that is very important.
Yeah.
A long answer, sorry for that.
Well, there's quite a lot of things to unpack there, and I think the safety culture is sort of something I'd like to get to, because I think it is fundamental. But I just want to kind of get our arms around the sort of basics a little bit more. You mentioned training and you mentioned building of competency. Johan, this is a big change from probably bigger change than we've seen in any other kind of area that we've worked on. And clearly Wartsila play a really important role, not just with working with companies like we have today here, shipping companies who have simulators, use simulators, but also the whole maritime education and training aspect. Just how are you approaching this and the sort of different dimensions that Wartsila are looking at as part of this?
Yeah, I mean, first, I mean, just going back to what Kirsten said, it's a lot of people that needs training, right? The problem is that there is very little experience and knowledge about the alternative fuels out there, meaning that who is supposed to transfer this knowledge to the trainees? Yeah, a lot of training needs to be done, but who should do it? So I think here we need to have a new approach of how we do most of the training, right? I mean, we cannot rely on a classic bricks and mortar philosophy in classroom training, instructor-led. We somehow need to be able to create quality content on all levels of training, if it's interactive e-learning or if it's simulation, it needs to be a blended learning context, so that we're not reliant on a few persons traveling around the world and trying to transfer this knowledge to people. It will never work, at this scale. So we need to have a different approach of how we actually both train and assess people working with the alternative fuels. I mean, that is something that we work with OGG on, understanding how this can be done in a good way, that we can do what we call self-directed training, both when it comes to the e-learning, but simulation, without compromising on the quality. But yeah, there are a lot of things to consider here for sure, but I think the lack of experience, I mean, we discussed before about the LNG as a fuel. It's a totally different thing. We had the LNG carriers with using the cargo as fuel. It's a different thing, methanol, ammonia. There isn't this scale of knowledge out there. I think that is important.
Turning to some of those practicalities that you're thinking about there, we've got an entire infrastructure of METI, maritime education and training, of kind of training program standards, all of that sort of stuff in place. And then suddenly we don't, and yet we're starting the job. So, I mean, going to the sharp end of it, if I can with you, James, how are you at V approaching this? And because this is your role, effectively, right? So give us an idea of how you do something like this.
Definitely. So we've made the investment in V in a dedicated training centre for new fuels in our Seafarer training centres in Chennai and in Manila. And that was all driven by demand, really, from our clients. So this year we had 4 dual-fuel methanol container ships come into our fleet. And as we were preparing for those vessels to come in, we realised that actually the training material isn't really there. There's not the knowledge across the industry of how we should operate them. So we really had to start that from scratch, build custom material, build the simulators, and everything that comes with it. I think one of the challenges we're starting to see, though, is there's not one fuel, one size fits all for every vessel type. Ammonia, for example, might be particularly suitable for bulk carriers, but there's probably a lot of social negativity for it to come into the cruise ship industry. And whereas before you can have commonality in training, you know, a seafarer that's got a motor ticket can go from a container ship to a cruise ship with not too much additional training. That comes quite difficult if a seafarer gets a methanol certificate. They suddenly become very, very limited. They can't then go straight away to an ammonia carrier. And so it's do you have to train seafarers with multiple certificates, or are they, you know, limited to only one vessel type? And I think as an industry, that's a big problem that is going to come out over the next few years.
Yeah, that sort of mobility of the workforce is something that I'm sure keeps anyone in crewing up at night. It's hard enough making crew changes based on everyone knowing HFO. But I'm glad we you took it round to the seafarer, because obviously that's where we wanted to be with this debate, really, and looking at, you know, what it does actually mean for seafarers. And we don't have a seafarer on this to put on the stage today. But Simon, this is your bread and butter, working with seafarers, understanding where they're at, where their heads are at, what they need. So I mean, it'd be great if you could just sort of tell us. I know you've done your recent study about the impact of decarbonisation on seafarers. So if I could get you to kind of, what does it tell us, and how are seafarers approaching this right now?
Yes, certainly. We were picking up on the helplines some sort of anxieties from crew about decarbonisation, and wondering, is that just, you know, a reaction to change, a natural reaction to change, or is there something more than that? And also very much struck by, whenever we went to conferences, all the discussion was very much about the technical elements and very little about the impact on the humans who are responsible for delivering it. So somebody on my team is a former engineer. He actually suggested that we come up with a survey amongst seafarers that we have contact with. We've got about 400 responses, so it's a small study, but actually quite interesting, the responses that we got. The bulk of people that came back to us were engineers, unsurprisingly, but we also got responses from deck officers and some from shoreside as well. There was a lot of positivity about decarbonisation. It's the right thing to do. It's an exciting professional challenge to be part of that. So I thought, you know, that's important to sort of emphasise at the outset. But also, of course, there were concerns. Workload, the additional workload, they were already experiencing that, and then the resultant fatigue that might come from that. The challenge of being faced with commercial pressures on one side and regulatory requirements on the other. I think seafarers must sometimes feel that they're a melon between two boulders, and it takes a certain type of person to be able to cope well with those kind of pressures and be able to perform. Also challenges in terms of the different regulatory regimes. And, you know, what would be the impact of that? Those on fixed trading patterns, obviously they found that less of an issue. And actually, you know, you learn as you go along and you start to build up the relationships and the experience. There was quite a bit of discussion about blame. If something goes wrong, who's to blame? And inevitably for seafarers, when you look at some of the, you know, the high-profile incidents that we've had recently, where seafarers are very much in the front line when something goes wrong, what's the impact of that on their psychological well-being? And also, how will they handle difficulties? How will they handle things that they don't understand? Will they readily come out and say, do you know what, I don't understand this, I need some support? And also, if you think about how precarious their employment can sometimes be, that's not a very good mix in terms of creating an environment in which, look, we're all in this together and we want to be able to find solutions together. There were concerns about training, and of course that's linked to workload as well. And then lastly, of course, safety as well. One of the seafarers described it as being a bit like a test pilot for a new type of aircraft. And a bit exciting, but at the same time quite worrying. So that's sort of the feedback that we were getting through this study.
Yeah. You may not be aware, we've been releasing sort of training titles on this, and at the end of training titles, people get to put their feedback in. And the feedback, I'm seeing something very similar in terms of the enthusiasm for learning about it as a subject. You know, it's scoring very well on that sort of engagement stuff. But just let's just take a quick look at the panel, the poll that we sent out there. I'm not surprised. I think Norway is generally a bit ahead of everybody, but it's good to see that we can see the vast majority are either already implementing measures or are well prepared, and few that haven't started on there. Let's open up the questions, and if there are any questions from the floor, put your hand up, but otherwise just pop them onto Slido and we'll see how we go. I just want to stay on this thing here about seafarer confidence, because I was contacted by some seafarers online after I posted some stuff about ammonia training, and we had a very good conversation, and they actually wrote me quite a lot of detailed stuff around. It was ammonia was the big concern. So I mean, it's a question to all of you, and just jump in. How can we build sort of seafarer confidence in this? You know, they're being told, oh yeah, this is something we're doing, and yeah, but it's great. We're putting out these new ships coming on the water, but there is this anxiety there. How do we give them the confidence, do you think?
I think there's got to be an element of training and involvement, so that can be actually getting chief engineers or others involved, maybe even in the risk assessment processes as we're getting nearer to vessel commissioning. That's specific for a vessel that's coming out new, but you're going to then have crew rotations and things like that. So it is getting education out there and training. I think it's going to be probably practical simulators or similar. I think having been there and blacked a cruise ship out with 1,800 people on hay, you then find out why it happened, and it's because of little changes. But it's important that people get the emergency response and confidence should things happen as well, because things do happen. And that also then gives people confidence, because when you've been drilling that, you get more au fait with systems as well.
I think Michael's just teed up a goal for you. Yeah, put that one away.
Well, I would say I fully agree. You know, involvement and having feeling of ownership of the whole process. But I do also think that just-in-time delivery of training is very important here, so that you're not supposed to pick up things that you learned 2 years ago when you were about to do a bunkering operation, right? You should be able to go back, run through the bunkering operation right before you actually do it, right? So I think that is something that the industry needs to, adapt more, just-in-time learning. I think that will help.
So that it's available as they need it, sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. We have a question in, and I'm going to sort of come to you. I think I'm interested to know how you involve seafarers in this sort of process, as was being described. But this one is specifically, I think, a good one for you to pick up. How aware do you think the crew are about the decarbonisation regulations, CII, for instance?
I do think there's actually a disconnect between why we have these regulations, the explanation to seafarers of the value that these regulations bring. And that disconnect really comes, I think, from, we've talked about it earlier, a bit of the blame game, that seafarers are continually, they're the ones reporting the data, so every time there's an error in the data that leads to a poor CII value, they're immediately getting an email. It could be at 3 o'clock in the morning their time, and they're suddenly having to deal with correcting the data, and that's becoming more and more of a full-time job almost. It's increasing the workload massively, and I think we've sort of talked about it in the last panel. That's where the digital solutions come in to help seafarers, so they're not having to do manual reporting in Excel and emailing them around the world. They can enter it in the system, it checks that the data's right, and that system helps to remind them that we're doing this as an industry to reach net zero, and this is the value that actually doing this reporting is bringing. But yeah, there's definitely a disconnect and a challenge there at the moment.
And you talked about that sense of mission, Simon, as well. That sort of, do we think companies are doing enough to sell that?
Within the recommendations that we've got in the study, we talk a bit about actually involving seafarers at every stage, and so that they actually feel very much part of the overall process. But that links to leadership culture. the way in which traditionally maritime is very hierarchical. Is that something that's actually going to work in the future with something like this? I think people need to be able to, yes, they need to understand the regulations. They also need to understand how to interpret them, of course. And that needs partnership, I think, between everybody.
And that sort of brings us around to the safety culture thing there, Kirsten. I'm interested to know from DNV's perspective, because you talked about the importance of that culture. You talked about that, you know, we're raising the bar on the expectations of safety culture and what people will need to do. How do you see the possibilities to kind of codify that into something that could be, for example, put forward to approval to an organisation like CLASS, like DNV?
I think it's related to safety culture. I think it's so important that it's not just another thing, but it's integrated in the way you actually operate. So it must be very close related to, for example, I think that the safety management system is a foundation that is a very great opportunity to create your culture and to influence your culture in your organization. So I think to build in very, incentives in terms of acting safe or acting related to decrease the emissions as well, related to energy efficiency, to have explicit goals on both safety and also decarbonization, and build this into the safety management system to actually influence your culture in your way.
Yeah, and it's interesting the way those things are kind of interfaced with things like ESG, you know, getting people to actually think about how they prove what they're doing. So we have a question here about, do we think seafarers are taking a proactive approach for decarbonisation on board? I suppose, how could they, in a sense? I guess it depends on if they're not on an active vessel at the time. But is there anything in the study that sort of
certainly, I emphasise that positivity they had towards the decarbonisation agenda, and they're glad to be part of it. But I think for them to take a proactive approach, of course, that's got to be encouraged. So this comes back to the leadership culture issue, because if officers are not talking to them about it and they don't engage with them in that process, where's the incentive to be proactive?
You want to come in?
Yes, I would like to come in. I have an example, actually. I don't know if you are familiar with the EPI, the Environmental Port Index. It's a lot of Norwegian ports that actually have that, and that it measures actually how much emissions you have when you are on port, and if you emit less, then you get a lower fee while on port. And what is very interesting that we can actually now from the database see the same ship at the same port at the same time of the year have different emissions. So that depends on how you actually are operating the vessel while in port. So I think in some crew, they are very focusing on this, and some crews are not.
Oh, that's fantastic to hear. So if decarbonisation presents such an exciting future for seafarers, do you think it could serve as one of the promotional strategies to attract more workforce into a seafaring career? Is it strong enough for us to actually say to people, you can make a difference, come and join this exciting industry? Any thoughts from anybody on that?
I think as part of a package, I think the modern generation you see are more focused on the importance and the impact on the world. And I think by shipping showing that it's actually doing something and potentially will be needing greater technology to make it safe, make it happen, you can get it as a way to fly the flag. Mm-hmm. So I think it's certainly something, and yes, I think it can be used. We've just got to use it as a whole package.
Part of the puzzle. Anyone else want to come in, Simon?
Yes, I think it could, because when you look at the motivating factors for young people as they come into the workforce these days, they're certainly very different from when I first started working. And quite often they will say that actually it's the values of the organisation that they look for, and that is what might attract them. So the fact that if you could see them as the forefront of something in terms of something like decarbonisation, Yes, it could be. I think there's another big question there about how it's marketed and how the industry actually, addresses this whole issue of where is the future workforce going to come from.
Yeah, and you and I have had quite a few chats on that. And I've got a whole presentation on that, but on our YouTube channel, if you want to see about people's attitudes and values of work. The other thing to pick up on your point, Michael, two biggest nations, people under 25 concerned about climate change. Number one, Philippines. Number two, India, mirroring exactly our crew. So I do think that's the point. So we're getting to the end now, and I think it's good to give everybody a chance to kind of to answer a question and grab the mic for the final round, as it were, and perhaps a sobering question about we've got big targets. There's a lot riding on it. How optimistic are you all in terms of whether we are going to pull this off? Can we decarbonise this industry in anything like the timescales that are being talked about, 2030 targets, 2050 targets? Can we do it? I'm going to run back this way.
I think we can. I'm going to be the positive voice. I mean, I think we're quite lucky, unlike a lot of industries that are trying to decarbonise. We've actually got a global body representing the industry, which is the IMO, to set policy. And quite a lot of other industries just don't have that. They're relying on companies just agreeing between them how to decarbonise. So I think, the IMO is really valuable for our industry. The work at MEPC 82 a few weeks ago is another step in the right direction. So I'm going to be positive and say we'll get there.
Thank you.
And certainly from the responses that we got, it wasn't all doom and gloom. There was quite a lot of positivity there. So I think it's about how we move forward from here. One of the big recommendations that we make is that actually to value seafarers as partners in the process, not to see them as something that, okay, look, we've got this plan, this is what we're going to do, and this is what we need you to do. That's, I would say, not the most positive approach. If you want to get people on board, engage them in it from an early stage and keep them engaged. Make them see that it's a difficult job to do, but people will do difficult jobs if they're well led, well supported, and if they feel that what they're doing is important. That's just basic psychology.
Johan?
Yeah, I mean, failure is not an option, I would say, and typically humans are adaptive, right? So I would say that with focus and collaboration, we have all the possibilities to pull this off.
Thank you very much. Michael?
I would agree. I think we can do it. We need to collaborate. I think shorter term, maybe not as positive. One area where we really need to get things going, we need to get IMO getting good emissions regulations, and so we don't get fuel EU, fuel US, fuel China, fuel wherever, because that's just going to make everything more bureaucracy than actually pushing people in the right direction.
Okay, thank you, Michael. And
I'm also positive because we see that it is increasing. The number of vessels choosing, have the opportunity to go on alternative fuels is increasing. And the front runners is doing a great job, so I'm positive.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And with 10 seconds to spare, it only remains for me to say thank you very much to our panel, and please give them a round of applause. Thank you.